Perfect. All right. So thanks everyone for coming to the event tonight. I'm super excited to be here and excited to talk about this topic. To introduce myself just a little bit, I am Lindsay Murphy. I'm currently the Director of Data and Analytics at Maple. And I've been in the analytics industry for over 11 years now. And I've been a formal people manager for about 5 years. And more recently, I've gotten into other forms of leadership, such as mentoring and teaching courses. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic today, as I think the transition to people management can be really difficult for a lot of folks, I think, especially for data people. But I'm hoping that we can change that narrative by better preparing folks for the realities of the job and kind of stepping into, if you're interested, stepping into that people management role. So if there's any individual contributors in the audience tonight who are curious about people management or new people managers, I hope that you'll get some value out of my talk. So to give a quick outline before we jump into it, I want to talk a little bit about, we'll go back in time to talk about the data industry in general and the growth that we've seen over the past 10 years. As I'm sure everybody here knows, a lot has changed in the last 10 years, and that's had a lot of impact on career paths and the options that people have. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the transition to people management and some of the experiences I had and why I think this transition can be difficult for a lot of folks, and share some things that I think will be helpful to people who might be considering this change. We'll talk a bit about how you might want to think about choosing your path. So, whether you want to stay in an individual contributor role or become a people manager, and what's best for you based on your personal situation. And then I'll close things off by providing some advice and some tips and some things that I've learned if you do want to become a people manager. So if we go all the way back to 2012, feels like a really long time ago, the data landscape looked a lot different than it does today. So this chart is something that was created by an individual named Matt Turk, and he now creates these every year. But back in 2012, this was the first version of it. And a lot of the tools that you see on the chart today are probably not even really ones that people use anymore for the most part. And one of the biggest differences back around this time, this was when I was starting my career, was that a lot of times the data infrastructure and how data was kind of managed in databases was really decoupled and separate from the users of analytics. And that was the case for me. I was writing SQL and using Excel, but I really had no idea, how did the data get into the database? Where did it come from? Any of those things. And so this was typically handled by database architects or IT functions, and companies had to invest a lot in building and maintaining this data infrastructure. And around the same time was when the advent of social media and smartphones. Around this time in 2012, we started to see this like massive growth of data for the first time, where vast amounts of data could now be turned into insights and models and revenue generating opportunities for businesses. And it was also around this time that we started getting noticed in mainstream media. So, Harvard Business Review coined the sexiest job of the 21st century as the data scientist around this time. And so we were also starting to get noticed as data people in mainstream for certain headlines like this. So, really, for the first time, the rest of the world was kind of starting to be interested in data. And also in 2012, cloud data warehouses started to launch on the market, but it really was, they weren't really widely adopted at this time. So if we fast forward a bit to 2019, things start to look a lot different. So this is the same people doing the same chart. There's way more logos on it. There's many more different sections, and the landscape looks a lot different. Around this time, obviously, cloud data warehousing had become really more of a standard for a lot of businesses to deliver analytics. Data existed in many more places and tools, and moving all that data around to get a single source of truth had become a bit more of a focus. And so with that, we had a new sexiest job of the 21st century, and that was the data engineer. And really, this was due to the fact that data scientists had been spending so much of their time really cleaning data, building data pipelines, rather than actually building the valuable parts of their job, which is really focusing on predictive models and generating insights. And while the modern data stack had been around before 2019, it was really around this time ish that things started to become really a focal point for the analytics industry. And so cloud computing had gotten much faster and cheaper. Data ingestion tools like Stitch and Fivetran were really easy to set up and provided out of the box ETL services. And transformation tools like dbt were really changing the game for analytics and allowing data professionals to begin working more like software engineers. And so the modern data stack has really created this opportunity for more breadth and depth of technical roles than we had seen before. And if we fast forward to this year, this chart is now getting a bit ridiculous. I can't believe they're still doing this, but it's almost impossible to read some of the logos on there. But even with the advancement over the last 6 months to a year in terms of AI and machine learning, I'm sure everybody's on up to speed on ChatGPT and all the other things going on. But beyond that, there's all kinds of other sections and areas of focus that have been added to this landscape. So as all of this continues to grow, all of these tools and software require new and increasingly complex technical capabilities for data folks. And again, we have a new sexiest job title, which is now analytics engineer. And while the world is probably tired of hearing about how sexy we are, it really does open a lot of advancements and opportunities for folks in data professional roles. So there's a lot more versatility to the roles that are available. Analytics engineer wasn't even around probably 5, 6 years ago. Data engineers are definitely lots more jobs out there for those folks. And even on the side of data scientists and machine learning engineers, the roles are becoming a lot more technical, and teams are being able to begin working more and more like software engineering teams. And so while software engineering is a much older discipline, it has a very well-defined career path. And now data teams can start to imitate those career paths. And so that brings us to a typical software engineering career ladder, which looks a little bit like this. So typically engineers will start out at a junior level and they'll work their way up to become more and more senior. And then around this point is when the person in that role would need to decide, do I want to continue on the technical track and become more senior in a technical role, or do I want to move into people management? And if you look at some larger tech companies like HubSpot or Shopify, they already have roles for data professionals in the staff and principal levels. And this is a really exciting change because when I started my career about 10 years ago, for the most part, the career path was much less well defined. And it was generally the main path to getting more senior. You had to move into the managerial track for the most part. So with that, I want to switch gears a little bit now and just talk more about my transition into people management and what that transition is like. So for the first couple of years of my career, I spent moving up through individual contributor roles and eventually moved into a director role where I became a people manager. And by the time I had reached the point of making this transition, I was an analytics manager. So I wasn't managing people at that point, but I was managing a whole function and sort of serving as like the data team of one. And up until then, I had been a subject matter expert at my company for many years. I had learned a lot of technical skills and sort of honing them. So making this transition to people management, I was kind of expecting it, to be the next big step in my career and that I would be, really good at it. And from day one, it kind of felt something like this. So seemingly overnight, I had gone from, being pretty good at what I do, feeling pretty confident in my skills, to really feeling like, I had no idea what was going on. And it wasn't a great feeling. And if you speak to any new people managers in your life, or you scope this out on Google, you'll find that this is generally a pretty shared sentiment for the most part. Many books and articles will claim that managing people is one of the hardest jobs in the world. A lot of people say outright that being a manager sucks. And to quote this person, some days I feel like I'm really good at my job, and some days I feel like I just suck. And this one was one of my favorites. This person says that they hate being a people manager and they've only been doing it for 16 days. So whether or not they've given it enough of a chance is another question. But having gone through this transition myself and felt some of these feelings through the transition, I have a bit of a theory of why this transition feels this way. And that is because I think that most people, and myself included, have certain expectations of what this transition will be like. And those expectations are not necessarily aligned with the realities of the job. And so when expectations and reality are out of misalignment, you can end up in the disappointment camp, which I think is what seems to be happening for most folks. And so some of these expectations, or maybe misconceptions we might want to call them, would be things like, I'll get training on how to be a people manager. And in my experience, this can't be further from the truth. So most people managers are generally shockingly unprepared for this new role that they're in. A study done in 2016 by a company called Grovo ran a survey with middle managers and found that 87% of the people that they surveyed wished that they had more training before they became a people manager. So many companies don't offer formal people manager training before you take on this new role. And because management is a totally different job than what you were doing before, you're going to need to learn some of these skills on the job, and you're going to have to take ownership over your own development. Another misconception is that becoming a people manager is a promotion, and I think this is a promotion may be involved, but I think thinking of it in that way or framing it in that way is incorrect. It is really a job change. So your day-to-day work will now be totally focused on different things. You'll be helping your team overcome challenges, you'll be resolving conflicts, you'll be running one-on-ones, and you'll be spending more time in meetings and on admin. You'll probably have less time. You will have less time for sure to focus on your technical skills. And if you're only becoming a people manager to get the promotion, then that might not be the best motivation. Another big misconception, and this one for me was a big one, was I will begin to, or I will deliver value and get recognition in the same way that I did before. So your value proposition will actually change entirely. Previously, you will no longer be the one that is doing the work, but you'll be helping others to do the work. And so your value and what you deliver in the company changes. And this can be a hard thing to wrap your head around, especially if, like me, you enjoy the work that you're doing and you enjoy doing a good job. So you have to be okay with letting go of the doing part of your job. And that can be very hard. As a manager, your main job will be to support others. So then what do you get to take credit for? What do you get recognized for? And how you think about your own value is going to have to fundamentally shift. Another misconception would be, I like working with people, and hopefully you do like working with people if you're considering going into management, but so managing people will be easy. And this is really, again, not the case. Your day-to-day is going to be much higher stakes now. You'll be dealing with things like power dynamics and relationship management and influence, and really just people issues rather than technical issues. And as we know, people are messy and emotional and can be illogic at times, and you will be as well as a people manager. So you'll have to deal with more serious issues like conflict and personal problems, and may even deal with mental and physical health issues. You may have to fire someone or let somebody go, and those things are never pleasant, and they're much more difficult to deal with than maybe fixing a bug or building a project on a deadline. And lastly, this is probably the most important time in your career that you would want to be getting feedback because you're transitioning into a brand new role. But you'll probably find that you're going to get less feedback than you ever have before. As you become more senior in your career and as you start to manage people, direct reports often won't proactively provide constructive feedback, even if things are going poorly. So you're going to have to work really hard to build trust with your team and make them feel comfortable to share how they're feeling with you. And some companies will employ things like 360-degree feedback, and that can be helpful, but sometimes feedback can also be inconsistent. Because each relationship that you have with a direct report is unique and different, you're going to have to work really hard to develop self-awareness and understand what feedback to take and how you kind of work through that. So hopefully I haven't scared everybody off the path of people management, but understanding all of these challenges about people management, I hope gives people a bit more of a reality going into what the role might be like. But if you are embarking on this decision and you're kind of deciding, do I want to continue on the technical track or do I want to go down the people management path? How do you really decide which path to take and what's right for you? So the first thing I suggest is taking some time to reflect. So think about what motivates you. What is driving you forward in your career? What are your personal and work values? What does work mean to you? Think about how you measure your own value at work, and would you be happy if this changed? Would you be okay with not being the one delivering the work? And lastly, think about your long-term goals. So where do you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and what roles are going to help you get there? And even if the role you want to be in doesn't necessitate people management, maybe some of the skills that you learn through people management will help you get there faster. Another thing to consider is writing out a pros and cons list. So for an individual contributor role or a technical track, it might look something like this. You as an individual are going to have different pros and cons on your list. But thinking about some of the clear pros are, responsible for your own work and the delivery and quality of it. You would be able to hone your technical skills and become an expert. And arguably, it might be less stressful and demanding over time. But on the other hand, some of the cons might be that you'll miss out on untapped potential. Maybe you would be a great leader and you just haven't tried it yet. It may take you longer to develop some important soft skills that can help you in your career. And it may take you longer to get more senior in your career, depending on your company. I don't think this is, again, I wouldn't say this is a reason to go into people management, but you may need to move companies if you want to continue to get more senior in an IC role. And then do the same for the people management role. So thinking about some pros for this role would be it is very fulfilling as a people manager. So while I probably said a lot of things that sound really scary, on the flip side, it can be a really wonderful experience. You have the opportunity to be a wonderful boss that can help people achieve their goals. You can help people perform better than they ever thought they could before, and that can be really, really rewarding to see people blossom in their career. You'll get to develop important skills for your career growth. So things like communication, project management, interpersonal relationships, negotiation, motivating others. Those are all really invaluable skills to a career path. You'll be more involved in setting vision and direction of the team. So if you want to have more say in what your team works on or where things are going, this might be an opportunity for you. And then working on driving efficiency and improving processes is a big part of your job. So if you like doing that, you would get to focus on it more. On the flip side, some of the cons, I think people managers often are at a higher risk of burnout because of the increased expectations. So now not only do you have expectations from your senior leaders and your manager at the company, you're also going to have expectations from your team and your direct reports. And sometimes those expectations may be out of alignment. So you have to figure out how do you balance those and figure out how to get through those challenges. You'll now be responsible for other people's work quality and delivery. You'll spend less time doing, and you'll probably be in more time in meetings and on admin. So that's kind of unavoidable. Your technical skills could get dull. So if you don't kind of carve out some time to keep working on those things, that may become a little bit harder for you. And then lastly, you'll get less feedback and recognition, or you'll have to work harder to get those things. And then if you want to take it a step further, think about some of these questions to ask yourself. So focusing on maybe some of the most challenging aspects of people management, or maybe the most rewarding, but are you happy when you can help others grow and succeed? Do you enjoy talking to people, listening to their problems and resolving conflicts? Are you comfortable giving feedback and having difficult conversations? And will you be able to help people manage through difficult personal life situations? So I kind of think if you're answering no to most or any of these questions, you might want to think a bit more about, are you going to be happy in this transition, or do you need to work a bit more on developing some of these skills? And if you're still not sure, some cool things that I've heard about recently is the idea of a manager apprenticeship. So I know of one company in Toronto that offers this, but it's basically the opportunity where you get to try becoming a people manager before committing. So maybe for 6 months, you have a manager role, you get some training from your company at the time. And then at the end of that period, you get to decide, do I want to stay in this people manager role? Or do I want to go back to IC? I think those opportunities are rare, but they could be, things that we start to ask companies to offer us more of. And then thinking about becoming a people manager doesn't necessarily have to be a one-way door decision, which means you can always return to IC roles in the future if you feel that people management isn't a good fit. This blog post that I've linked to here is called The Engineering Pendulum. And from Charity WTF is the author. And if you check out that blog post, this person truly believes that some of the people who are most impactful at their company and the best contributors are people who've moved from an IC role into people management and back again. And those people, get the best of both worlds. They get to develop their technical skills and also work hard on their soft skills and people management skills. So if you are thinking of making the transition, here's a few pieces of advice that I wish I had received before making my transition. The first one is to just accept that management is a really complex and difficult job and cut yourself some slack. You're probably not going to be good at it, or you're probably even going to be bad at it for a little while you figure it out. And as long as you're trying to improve and you're investing time and upskilling yourself, I think you're making good progress. Next, own your own development. And as much as you can, if you're talking to your manager about becoming a people manager in the next 6 months to a year, start spending time now on figuring out what skills you're going to need to develop and start training yourself now. If you're a little bit prepared before you take on the role, you're going to be ahead of a lot of other people managers. Ground your expectations in reality and try to understand how this role is going to differ technically, functionally, emotionally, and know that you're going to be back at square one in terms of skills and experience. And then look for opportunities to try it. So if you can ask your company, is there a way they can offer you a management apprenticeship, or consider, maybe you're going to try people management for a few years and then you're going to go back, but don't feel that you're stuck to one path forever. And lastly, this is a really big one. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So if you are moving into this new role, make sure that, your manager is there to help you, that your HR team is there to help you when you need it, and don't be afraid to reach out. And to close things off, I just wanted to share a couple of resources that I had recommended to me that I found very helpful. When it comes to training and upskilling yourself in people management, in the beginning, it can be easy. It can get easy to be caught up in all these different management books that people talk about. And I personally found a lot of them are very theoretical. So, things like, not to bash any of the management books out there, but things like Radical Candor and other books like that, they're great, but they are very, very theoretical. And I think those are more useful when you're later in your people management career. In the beginning, you just need to learn how to do the basics. How do I run a one-on-one? How do I give feedback? How do I delegate work? And how do I coach my team? So the Effective Manager is a great resource that teaches all of these very fundamental and tangible skills of being a manager. The Manager Tools podcast is another resource, and that is put on by the same authors who wrote The Effective Manager. This podcast actually started in 2005, so they have literally hundreds of episodes on very, very specific topics and challenges that you might run into as a manager. And lastly, this is a super old book that I'm recommending. It's from like 1936, but it's a classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this can be really valuable and applicable when you're trying to build relationships and make sure that people are understanding your intention and that you're getting the right perception as a new manager. So with that, I will close things off, and I hope this was helpful. And thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, nice one, Lindsay. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, if you want to maybe close. Perfect. Hey, we're back here. So just want to ask before we jump into the Q&A, if we can ask our lovely audience, let's see some hand clap emojis. Let's see some smiler face emojis to show your appreciation for Lindsay and her sharing her time today. So that's, yeah, really, really interesting stuff there. A few takeaways I had there was, is this a job change or a promotion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a job change, really. A job change can be a promotion, but I think, yeah, fundamentally what you're doing and what you're responsible for are now two very, very different things.
Absolutely.
I was chatting with somebody else a few months ago, and they were talking about progressing up, or they had progressed up, and they were like a VP, director of engineering or whatever. And they were like, yeah, I thought moving into this role, I was going to get paid so much more than my senior ICs. Nope, that's certainly not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that pyramid, isn't it? There's more juniors than there are intermediates and there are seniors, and there's probably only one director, VP. Another takeaway I had was, just to kind of unpack some of the stuff there is sometimes the best engineers or data scientists don't make the best managers. Like sometimes those superstar A players that's their sweet spot. You're really good at building the models or the pipelines, and as soon as you need to interact with people and have difficult situations and solve someone else's problems, it's not a strength. So I think knowing, yeah, as you said, kind of do some reflection, go through that pros and cons list. My fiance is very, very fond of a pros and cons list.
Yeah.
So I think looking at it objectively like that, because you can't argue with a list like that. So I would certainly invite our audience, if you do have any questions for Lindsay, pop over to the Q&A section. There's a little tab there. It looks like we have a few questions. One of the questions I wanted to ask, not super related to kind of the content tonight, but as a director in your position, kind of managing technical folks, the difference between machine learning engineer and data scientist. We were recruiting a senior data scientist role earlier this year, and then our client turned around and was like, oh no, it's a machine learning engineer role. I'm like, what's changed? And she's like, the title. I'm like, okay, can you maybe unpack and share your thoughts on maybe the differences and similarities between a machine learning engineer and a data scientist, and maybe why in this instance those terms were so interchangeable?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think the term data scientist has been around for a while, and it tends to be this like catch-all term that I think sometimes gets really vague. And so there's actually a talk that was given by an individual named Emily Shario. I think it might be a blog post actually, but she firmly believes she called it down with data science. And she kind of believes that this like title of data science should actually not be one that we use anymore because it is so vague and it's unclear what that role is. In my experience, a data scientist is somebody who might be doing more of the predictive analytics and modeling to generate insights, but maybe they're less focused on putting those models into production necessarily. Whereas a machine learning engineer is somebody who is going to build a model that might go into your product if you're developing software, or you have a user app or something like that, where that model is going to be something that they put into production, and then they actually have to continually train that model and monitor it. Whereas the data scientist might be closer to like almost like the data analyst role. They're kind of like the data analyst who can also write Python and do predictive analytics. And so I think we're seeing a bit of a shift here where data analysts are being asked to do more things like data scientists. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next like several years that maybe we see less of that title coming out and maybe a more defined, a data analyst that is also able to do predictive analytics and then separating that from machine learning engineering.
Yeah, cool. Thanks so much. I think, predictive analytics, kind of building, deploying, training the models, kind of maybe where that line in the sand is. Awesome. Thank you for clarifying. We have a question from Julian here. Julian has asked, how would you deal with a people problem, for example, not having authority of another team, and yet you have to resolve conflicts or issues between the two teams?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. This one is really hard because you kind of have to figure out like how do you influence someone who doesn't directly report to you, and if you have like conflicts, maybe you as a manager are having conflicts with another person, or maybe there's conflicts happening between people who report to you and somebody else on another team. I think for that you sort of need to get to the core of like what is the issue? Like is it a people issue? Is it like a misalignment issue? Is it something to do with like a project not being delivered on time, something like that? And then try to determine like what is the right course of action. I think if it's a people issue, then maybe you try to speak to that person directly who's on the other team and try to figure out, can you get to the bottom of that? And then if things don't work in that sense, it might be worth escalating to other people, maybe your HR team or the people who somebody that person reports to. On the flip side, if it's really just a misalignment issue, those problems are probably easier to solve. That would be, trying to figure out how do we get everybody on the same page? How do we resolve conflict from, a really objective area where, just getting everybody behind the same goal and making sure that that's kind of aligning people.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Lindsay, and thanks for the question. We've got another couple of questions here from Julian. Julian has asked, how should one track their own performance as a people manager, and when you also give credit to your team members and tout their accomplishments most of the time?
Yeah, this one is a hard one for sure. I think what I learned over time is that it's much easier to track your performance over time, both for your team and yourself. So something that I do that's really tangible is on Friday afternoons, I have a reminder in my calendar to write down accomplishments for the week. And so I will go in, I have like a document that I save, and I'll write down things that I did, things that my team did, and anything else that I can think of that's worth reflecting on from the week. And if the accomplishments are big enough, I will give kudos to my team, or I'll go like put that in a public channel, maybe on Slack if your company has something like that, and try to recognize my team members for the things that they've done. For myself, I would say you probably want to be touting your accomplishments with your manager. So that's something that you want your manager to know the work that you're doing, and you want your direct manager to be aware of all the things that you're doing behind the scenes. Managers often end up doing what I would call glue work, which is things that, you just kind of fill gaps and do things that need to get done. But that really often goes unnoticed. A lot of people don't see that. And so you really do need to kind of be your own advocate and make sure that your manager is aware of all the great stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, I've heard about that servant leadership style. It's like you want to kind of make your team shine, and you're there to support them. So it kind of aligns a little bit with that. But also, if you did a good job, you need a gold star too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If your team succeeds, then you're doing a good job as a manager.
For sure. And last question we have here again was from Julian. What is the best way to learn product strategy if you are moving into a senior role in a big company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm definitely not a product expert. I would say maybe looking out at some training that's available. I think data and product strategy kind of go hand in hand. So if you're able to kind of understand the objectives of the company that you work at, and if it's a product-led company, like ask your company to kind of share what the strategy for the company is. I think if you're trying to learn it to really be a leader in product strategy, you probably want to take some training, I would say. But yeah, I'm a bit of a less of an expert in product strategy, so I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question.
Nice one. Julian, maybe we can throw that question to Panima, who's going to be presenting third tonight. She is a product person. So, hey, Lindsay, just wanted to say once again, that's to kind of put a pin in your time for tonight. But thank you so much for stepping up. Really great insights there. Some good Q&A, some good audience on the live stream as well. So, yeah, super excited for your time and grateful for your time. And yeah, appreciate that. We'll jump on to our next presenter.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome. Cheers. See you around.